Hi, we're here from the Hart Debate Club at the University of Toronto. A lot of interesting discussion has been had recently about how the future is going to look for Generation Y, whether it comes to economics, safety, security, technology, or health. For that reason, we've decided to bring you the debate today. This House believes the Generation Y has a bleak future.
Ladies and gentlemen, the future for Generation Y is bleak. Why? Because the greatest international crisis that we have ever faced requires a level of international cooperation that we are wholly incapable of. And it requires states to bind together and reach international accords. As such, as an individual, I am powerless. Whether I'm a person living in the Maldives or I'm a person living in New Jersey, I don't have any power to stop the water coming in. I don't have the ability to speak at the international conferences which make decisions on these matters. And the great boon that the 20th century has given to the developing world, supposedly, is industrialization. Something which not only makes the problem much, much worse for the parts of the world that will be most affected by climate change, but which in turn comes along with a host of problems that cannot be mitigated. We're talking about the collapse of Rana Plaza in Bangladesh. We are talking about the use of sweatshop labor and child labor the world over, a financial and economic international system established which has led to the oppression of people the world over. Mr. Speaker, we would tell you on our side of the House that it doesn't matter where you are growing up, that economic future is bleak. Why? Because there is a coming demographic crisis. There are too many baby boomers, and there are too few Gen Yers. And the gap between the dependents, people who take up huge amounts of resources in terms of medical costs, in terms of pensions, that group will grow and grow as the relative number of workers fails to keep pace. So my retirement is coming sometime next century. But with globalization, the thing at the center of each and every one of these problems, we have increased communication and thereby exposed each other to different brands, to different ideas, to different lifestyles, and thereby revealed the real discrepancies between us. That, Mr. Speaker, more than anything else, has led to the worst impacts and effects of income disparity globally. On those grounds, we beg to propose.
Ladies and gentlemen, in deciding whether or not the future is bleak for Gen Y, we have to deal with some kind of criteria for measuring this question. And what we would tell you on side opposition is that Gen Y is better off than its predecessors, that there are, in fact, future developments that are coming forward that are going to mean better things for them and better things for society. And it's on that basis that we beg to oppose. I'm going to bring to you three constructive arguments. I'm going to talk about economics, I'm going to talk about society, and I'm going to talk about politics. And I'm going to briefly deal with two pieces of rebuttal to what Murphy told you. First, economics, because what I would like to tell you is that Gen Y has grown up in a society that is far different than the one before them. They are a society and a group of innovators and entrepreneurs. They create their own jobs. They are turning products that were once used only for one service into ones used for many. They create massive new job markets, not only in technology, also in medicine, things that benefit a large amount of the population. Second of all, they do this under a new guise of self-employment. And I actually think that this is particularly important in terms of what they can achieve and the way in which they operate, even though it's not traditional. Furthermore, Gen Y is actually much better at saving money because they have lived through a recession. They have different ideas of particularly what is a risk worth taking, and I think that that's particularly important. Second, I want to talk about society, because I actually think that a lot of the benefits that we get impact people in the developing world. First of all, because of the because of the fact that technology is becoming a lot cheaper. This improves education, this improves medicine. This means that we can educate more people through instances of communication technology, being able to provide laptops, things like that, to the poorest countries in the world, meaning that the mass of people that get educated is much greater. Furthermore, a lot of medicine is becoming cheaper because of the fact that there is much more innovation. You see the fact that there are extremely cheap needles that are going to be able to be distributed among a lot of countries. That's going to make it a lot easier to actually get medical attention. Third, I want to talk about political issues, because I think that it's particularly important to talk about actually how this impacts those living in the developing world. Because I actually think that it's important to note that GenY is the one that has actually been fighting for democratic rights, has been fighting for the ability to actually actualize what they believe a human being should be able to do. That the GenY might actually make it so the world does not live in as many authoritarian regimes as once before, because they are the ones able to best actualize their political will. Dealing with what Murphy tells you. He tells you that there is international cooperation that needs to come about because of climate change. 4 responses. One, I actually think that GenY is leading this change, that young people are the ones who are actually trying to get us to do it. Second, I think that green technology is becoming much cheaper because of innovations largely led by GenY in the technology sector. Third, I would tell you that there are adaptation plans that are coming about in virtually every country. And 4, the world is actually much more willing to take in environmental refugees than ever before, something that shows a lot of cooperation. He talks to you about economics and a demographic crisis, hugely outweighed in the developing world by the amount of people that are actually going to be able to take jobs. But furthermore, I actually think that the capacity for developed countries to deal with this problem is actually hugely great in terms of the way that we can divert resources. It's going to be better for all involved. It's on that basis that we beg to oppose.
The opposition side has given us a lot of piecemeal benefits, a lot of benefits from technology, a lot of benefits from finance, a lot of things that have been developed in the developed world, but she gives us no idea as to how they will actually be transferred to the developing world, other than we will help them, other than we will give them. I think that there has been overestimation as to what the developed world has been able to do, as to the amount of international cooperation that actually exists between nations. First, I'm going to do a bit of refutation, and then I'm going to rebuild my partner's case. So in economics, we hear that there are now innovators and entrepreneurs. I would say that the 20th century was perhaps the greatest period of economic growth, because it was a period of openness, because it was a period of actual international trade. The reason why the economy will never be as strong is because we see that we are actually entering into a period of time in which nations do not trust each other, in which nations are enacting more and more trade barriers to protect themselves through things such as health standards and labor regulations, through things such as tariffs. And I don't think that we will see more economic growth in the future. But furthermore, a lot of these new job markets that are created might create sort of low-wage labor jobs in developing countries. But a lot of times, these jobs don't actually get translated into better-paying jobs. You see no transition and no hope for people who do live in countries where the best job that they can get is working in a sweatshop. On technology, she tells us there is education. There are new tools available to educate people. She also tells us that there are new medications that are available. Unfortunately, the question is, how do we actually get these things to the people who need them the most? There's a lot of literature that says that the only way to educate people, the only way to make people healthier, is actually to ensure that they have a living wage, that they have a living income, that way they're able to take care of themselves and take care of their children. It doesn't matter if there is medication that is available that exists if you can't afford it, if there are drug patents that make it so that you can't afford the medication that you or your child needs. Next, on politics. We hear that this is the generation that's best able to actualize their political will. Well, I think the problem with that is, a lot of times through actualization, you actually do end up with a lot of civil strife. You do end up with entire generations of people that have seen only civil war, that do not know how to interact or live in a peaceful society, that have grown up with war and with conflict and have had their childhoods disrupted, that will find it problematic and traumatic to deal with sort of the stresses of the modern world. And I think that a lot of what my partner said went unresponded to. I think Murphy told us about climate change in a very clever way. He told us that climate change requires actual international cooperation of an unseen level. It doesn't matter if we have these adaptations. It doesn't matter if we have these new technologies. The only way that we can actually make a dent in sort of changing climate change is if we work together as a world. Unfortunately, we have seen thus far that that hasn't been effective, and I think that that's why the future is bleak, because it doesn't seem as though we're able to gain the sort of cooperation we need to actually make a difference. Because we now all buy the same products, because now farmers all across the world depend on companies like Monsanto for seeds, it means that when people do actually try to get involved in their communities, when people try to attempt to start projects to help others, a lot of times multinational corporations are not on their side. Companies like Monsanto have patents and have seeds that destroy themselves after one season. And what that means is that a lot of people who are trying to start these new community initiatives are unable to, and that's why the future is so bleak.
Alright, so for my speech I'm going to tell you why, in a variety of different areas of people's lives, Generation Y actually has a very bright future. Let's start by talking about health and well-being. We think that it's really important to note why it's important that access to medicines has actually been cheaper. We think, for the first time ever, Generation Y is going to benefit from a generation that will be covered universally by access to affordable health services. Universal coverage, because medicines are cheaper, is possible for the first time in the lifetime of Generation Y. We think, in terms of human development and in terms of access to services, this has increased exponentially because of access to technology. And this is why Generation Y is part of a generation that has the best human development and quality of life indexes ever in recorded history. We think the future is very bright there. How about peace and security? We hear on this side that trade barriers mean that growth won't occur and that inequality and conflict is going to prevail. But we actually don't think this is the case. We think Generation Y actually exists in the most peaceful generation to date. It's easy to be nostalgic about the past, but we have to remember that the 1990s were the time of very violent conflict, that we actually saw a lot of ruptures and persistent genocide occurring during this time, that there was a lot of economic turmoil, right? We think Generation Y is now in one of the most peaceful times, that people are actually seeing themselves as a part of a universal human community, and that emerging markets are starting to pull themselves up and to innovate in their own economy, one that participates in a lot more fair trade rules. All right, let's look at political rights. We think that information technology is really important here, right? Because people are able to communicate more easily, they're able to demand more accountable and better governance. This ultimately means that the future for those in Generation Y existing under the worst governments today, although some struggle will exist, will ultimately be able to hold their governments to account more than any other generation. The future is indeed bright. Let's look at economic rights, though. We hear a lot about structural unemployment from the other side. But we actually think because Generation Y has greater access to education due to increases in technology, that they are in fact the most educated generation to date. And that Generation Y is, as a result, in place to be the greatest innovators. That they can pull themselves up and be innovative. That new parts of the economy can be formed, and that new jobs and new opportunities will be founded. We think, actually, that for the poorest countries, the demographic dividend, that there are so many young people, is going to need immense growth opportunities for these countries. That countries in emerging economies, and especially in Africa, which has seen a lot of growth recently, the demographic dividend is poised to make them significantly richer than before. The future is indeed bright. Finally, in terms of environmental well-being, we know that climate change is a large challenge to deal with. But we think for the vast majority of countries, although certainly some people will be harmed by climate change, actually adaptation strategies and the new green economy is going to provide significant opportunities for people. We think Generation Y is the generation of the green economy and of sustainable development. This idea is proliferated strongly amongst Generation Y, and those in the youngest generations are the most likely to believe that climate change is occurring and to want to take action to stop it. We think Generation Y has considerable opportunities to promote green technology, to promote that international cooperation that older generations haven't supported in the past. And we think for this reason, even on climate change, the future is bright for Generation Y. We beg to oppose. Thank you.